So if you want, we can prolong that a little bit. So I suggest we now move on to an interesting case which is probably not quite in fitting with what we've talked about up till now. And this is the idea that the workers actually get a complete autonomy to actually set up their own structure. It would be a sort of cooperative. And the working conditions and the questions of governance and the sharing of the proceeds and value that is actually generated by the project are absolutely indispensable. That's part and parcel of the actual model. So I'm delighted to introduce this case. It's a French initiative. And I would also like to say that the OECD could have probably done well to include this example in Chapter 4, but it looked at SMART instead, which is a Belgian case, and which brings together some 60,000 workers, but it's not really a cooperative as Corp Cycle is. So what exactly is Corp Cycle? It is a project which has been around for several years, but I think it's mainly 3 since it's actually been set up. Mathis can correct me if I make any mistakes. It is a project. Well, if we try to see what it actually sets up and what its market is, it's pretty similar to what delivery services provide, immediate delivery services. And there was an excellent article by Lara Ale and others, and who has written a very interesting article about these delivery platforms. So there are deliverers, there are consumers, and there are restaurants that provide the food. And the market is what we could call a phased market. So there are different issues that we have to look at, and we also have to look at all the different working conditions that are concerned. So what's interesting is that the deliverers can be organized as members of a cooperative. The deliverers can therefore be members either of a cooperative or an association. So it's quite interesting because they are not forced to only be in a cooperative. They can also be part of an association. It also brings together restaurants who are in fact taking on certain commitments. They commit that they would be responsible and ecologically correct as well. And the platform, so to speak, is the association. The association is called Co-op Cycle, and that in fact guarantees that there is an organization between the restaurants and the orders. So between the services and the actual deliveries, what's happening is that the services are pooled. So the idea is that there is a sharing or a pooling, mutualization as we call it. So there is a software which manages the deliveries. There's a smartphone application to order your food, and then you've got different sorts of business or administrative services, legal backup, etc., which you get in traditional platforms. But in the traditional platforms, it is all organized at a fixed rate. And this, in fact, again, raises other questions because it means that the alternative versions, such as Co-op Cycle and others, which have cooperative natures and are also ecologically and socially responsible, will be able to get these fixed rates to be used for other purposes, for developing their model further. So there are fixed costs. The fixed costs are covered by salaries. This is also a question that we should look at because that is what happens in ordinary cycles. With these alternative versions, there's a lot of voluntary work that's carried out. So there are cases where, in fact, work is actually given for free. The relations between the association and the cooperatives is organized around a license which is given to them. And this license is for all those who use the service. And therefore, they ask for either a cooperative or an association status to be adopted, and also to adopt certain principles concerning a charter of sharing and social or expressions of solidarity. Now, in France, this is covered by a law in 2014, but in other countries, there are laws that cover this as well, which vary a great deal. This is not a European project, so it's not a European decree. There are also rules concerning the sharing of profits and the returns. Now, if they hadn't reached this sort of agreement, the idea is that between 3 to 5% is deducted on the turnover, and that is used for the running of the association, which is Club Cycle. So we have rules, therefore, that concern the relations between the cooperative and the association that provides the services, but also there's a clear thinking about the way in which it's going to be financed. So the way in which the platform that provides the services is funded. Now, concerning work conditions, because we're looking at that more closely, there's a great deal of thought that's been given to this issue. One point is that there is a European project where there are approximately 30 cooperatives that are involved. 6 countries: Spain, France, UK, Italy, Germany, and I think there are 670 people involved. So concerning the working conditions, the idea with Co-op Cycle is that not everybody has a salaried status. Some people do not necessarily want to have that status in some countries. However, in some cases, it is possible to have a different status. This is the case in Belgium, where you can go through another company which actually gives you the social the status. So in Belgium, they can go through SMART. You can be freelance, but you can be paid through another institution. And in France, there's another structure which is called the Coopérative d'entreprise et d'emploi, which means that you can have an salaried status, but you remain freelance or self-employed. This is something else we could talk about because it enables you to get the entitlements, but at the same time you remain self-employed. And you get your entitlements through another structure. Now, concerning the salaries and the remuneration, what is fixed is quite ambitious. They want the deliverers to work on 1,500 net euro salary per month. That means 30% above the minimum wage. Let us not forget that if I look at the sort of information that we have, as far as the deliverers are concerned, they get, for professional deliverance, 1,100 for students, 1,700 for professionals, but also it is totally unknown exactly what the working conditions are and the times of work. There's also a great deal of thought that's been given concerning the timings. For example, information is given upfront about your timetables. You're not sort of called in at the last minute for a shift and discover your shift times at the last minute. And also there are insurance contracts. There's quite a lot of thought given with activist and cooperative insurers, such as the MAIF in France, where there is working conditions that are protected. Concerning, for example, the length of the time spent delivering, etc. And there's also a great deal of thought which is given to whether one wants to be part of a collective convention, which is something which can be proposed. Now, we can obviously raise some questions with this. In some ways, this completely shakes up the usual economic model that we have, which is a capitalistic model, where the adjustment barrier is, in fact, based on the salary or the wage which is given. And so the question we can ask ourselves here is it possible to provide decent wages and good quality service in this particular sector, where, in fact, given the margins, and the margins are constantly being shrunk, is it possible to give proper wages for the work done? And what would be the right economic model that can match the work organization model which is being proposed? What I would like to say that a co-op cycle is also an illustration that it's quite difficult to find funds for a project such as this. There are not enough funds to cover fixed development costs. For the time being, these are entirely covered by voluntary work. So what a capitalist platform can get very easily, a cooperative such as Co-op Cycle has to depend on voluntary work and contributions. So I think that's really different. And I think we should pay tribute to all these young people who are giving a lot of their time and energy to come up with something such as this. And I think we should have some sort of balance so that they are recognized as well. And then there are also questions about what exactly is a platform which comes from this sort of social and solidarity-based platform or economy at a European level. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Co-op Cycle. As I said, we can have a few discussions now, and then we will have a 10-minute coffee break. So if you want, we have 5 minutes for questions.
La parole est à vous.
Good morning, and thank you, Adil, for that presentation. Let me just make some additional remarks regarding our approach. I mean, you're right in everything you say, but we have a much more horizontal than a vertical approach. That is, more and more delivery men and women want to organize themselves, want to create local delivery cooperatives. And therefore, what Co-op Cycle is trying to do is to federate these different initiatives according to a very simple mutualist principle to pool funds in order to finance certain services in software, in commercial approaches, in group purchases, insurance, etc. So the association, which you call the Bridgehead, which created the process, in fact, then gave way to the workers themselves, the delivery workers who are going to really control the Co-op Cycle, this federation of local cooperatives. Now, when it comes to the economic model, we soon realized that the local bicycle delivery cooperatives could not compete with Foodora delivery, that is food tech, very, very, very cheap baskets of food, which could not allow for decent pay for the delivery people. So it's really on diversity and payment for the last kilometer that bicycle delivery people on bicycles could get a decent pay, that is 1,500 euros per month, which is the case with many of the delivery men and women who participate in the Co-op Cycle. Thank you.
Oui.
Yes. I think that I'm from the University of Paris, Saclay. There are two things that you didn't mention. My name, by the way, is Alain Rallet. The question of pay is central because what the delivery men and women want is to be properly paid. They want proper working conditions. They also want proper pay, of course. And it depends on another factor, that is the price of the service to the customer. For instance, alternative models, alternative platforms that are well known, that have a good reputation, that they treat their delivery people well, could perhaps charge more to the customers, or at least to a certain clientele, and thus be able to better pay their workers. It's kind of like organic food. If people accept paying more for organic food because there's a very clearly identified service, well, so much the better. When it comes to the financing the overheads, fixed charges, there's an example of another platform in domestic services. It's called Lulu dans ma rue, Lulu on my street. I mean, that's, individual services, people who can do certain things, or people who used to be who sleep on the streets, and they help people, repair things or walk their dogs or things like that. And that platform is expanding in Paris. There are 7 or 8 kiosks. But there's a problem with profitability. The platform is not profitable because there's also the social and solidarity economy. But the way that they manage to make it is thanks to a subsidy from the city of Paris. They had been running losses of 4, 5, 6 million, and the city of Paris gave them 2 million, a subsidy. Their objective, after all, is not just to help people do home repairs, but also to breathe life into the neighborhoods. So there's a social objective, and that creates a positive externality for the city, and therefore deserves a better pay. Can there not be that argument for a group like CoopCycle to say that these platforms, can they not say that these platforms provide well-being to the city? The Bologna example shows that clearly. Well-being to the city, not just to the consumer or the rider, and that deserves, therefore, public support. Let me give the floor to Gabrielle. Since the issue arose of partnerships for the cities, perhaps Mathis could react to that. When I spoke about an economic model, that's really the willingness for the consumer to pay, which is directly related to price. That's what I meant. Gabrielle?
First of all, I want to mention that I'm the only one, besides of Thomas, that has to speak in a foreign language. So, and this is a very complex subject. So, so I hope I will manage to tell what I wanted to tell in English. I'm working at Verdi in Germany, the service trade union. The discussion now, I think it's very interesting, and I have the idea that there is a point we didn't discuss before, and this is the question of enterprise income, or the gains of the platforms, the profit of the platforms, and the relation to the wages or to the earnings of the riders and so on. And I think we should compare all these relations, because this is very interesting with the cooperative organization. You tell they have not so much profit. It is mainly based also on a voluntary system, and I ask myself why. And on the other side, there are the organizations like Foodora, and very, very profitable, I think. But I cannot imagine too much how much. So what I would be very interested when we speak about about distribution of the income. We should speak about distribution. And when we speak about distribution, we should ask what is to distribute, how much is the profit of the companies, and what is landing at the employers and the self-employed and this part. So I think this is a very important point, because we are looking only to distribute and the poor situation and low wages and so on, and we don't confront this and compare with the profits and the income of the companies. So I think we should look at this point much more, and also in the public discussion with politicians and so on, to look at these points of gains and of profit and of the incomes, the poor income of the people.
Merci beaucoup, Gabriel. Une autre...
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Anything else? Mathis, maybe? No, well... Microphone, please. There's you spoke about the last competitive externalities and the last kilometer with respect to other players. I'm not sure I understood what you meant by that. Yeah. Delivery of the last kilometer is something with, what with ecological concerns in society and traffic jams in the cities. Delivery for the last kilometer is something that works very well. Using bicycles, of course. That means that in a city, for the last kilometer from hubs, they're delivered by bicycle. And that's often what's profitable for the cooperatives. And it's very easy to find contracts because that's something that's really flourishing today. With respect to your question of the higher price, well, yes, it's right. The local bicycle delivery cooperatives charge more. But of course, there's the marketing argument we can have. These are cooperatives that treat their workers well. And there's also another argument, a quality argument, because in the cooperatives, the workers often work better. And so, therefore, they can command a higher pay. And often the workers, when they begin to organize themselves, are afraid and they ask for too little because they're not sure of the quality of their service. But through experience, we can see that gradually they raise their prices because it's a service and it's a quality service that's provided. Let me just add something on the positive externalities. Yes, this is an argument that we raise. Positive externalities on the environment, for example, but also the social externalities, because we work with organizations that try to find jobs for people. We have delivery people who were trained by these organisms, and then we try to bring them into the deliverers' cooperatives. Thank you. One last point before the break. Unless someone has a request for the floor. No? Rafael Bertolone, CGC. CFE CGC. Amongst the different stakeholders, so there's the question of the sharing wealth and sharing value. That's a central issue, which I think even overshadows the status of these workers. Is that something that in the different countries that you're studying, that you're discussing, or is that not even part of the dialogue with the platforms?
Là, j'ai presque envie de donner la parole au...
I'd like to give the floor to the project coordinator, the Mondolini Foundation. But anyway, in as much as, and I'm speaking for France, we're trying to gather good practices. And in France, the whole debate over price is essential. I didn't intervene on behalf of France in the previous discussion on pay, but we know very well in France that the discussions, the demands for the workers, and I'm not speaking of Uber drivers and things like that, but the discussions have to do with price. Pay, you don't get the same pay when you're a VTC, when you're an Uber driver or a bicycle deliverer or whatever. So I'm not going to say something about the global impact of all that, but I think that, as you said, Gabrielle, pay is and something that's really at the heart of all these discussions. It's something that's subjacent and that conditions all of the elements. That is, the price is something that that's going to determine all the elements, including pay. But let me give you the floor. 10 minutes late. Let's have a 10-minute break, 10 minutes max. Break is going to be on another floor, in a room 3120, 3120, 3120. Take the elevator down a floor, and it's very close to the elevator. Get back in 10 minutes.
On va vérifier juste s'il y a bien une livraison du café en bas. Principe, oui. Voilà, on revient. Ne bougez pas. Sorry, everybody. So we have no more coffee. So I hope we still have coffee there. Have orange juice, everything. So sorry. Okay. So we stay here. Please, colleagues. Hello, hello. C'est bon pour la pause? C'est bon pour la pause? On peut revenir ou pas? Oui, c'est bon? Ok, super.
C'est pour eux.
Bah oui, c'est pour elle.
Ah oui, d'accord. Ah oui, oui. Oui, c'était pas intéressant. Oui, c'est ça.
On va y aller. Very, very modern. But no. The person to play is the one.
Allez, on reprend le
S'il vous plaît, est-ce que nous pouvons...
Please be seated.
Non, on prend dans le micro.
Che fatica. Sì, sì, vado la tesi, no?
Alors, parce que là, on est un petit peu...
Now we're running late, so I really think we should get going.
Donc, on a un quart d'heure de retard. Non, ça va aller. Donc,
Right. Let's now move on. Second session. Mutual learning session number 2. We have 5 cases, so we're going to be doing this in 3 different sessions. We're going to be dealing with the agreements and collective agreements. Then we're going to be looking at laws as they exist. And then finally, we're going to come back to a local initiative. It's the Bill of Flagio. And it's a very interesting initiative to protect platform workers. So what I suggest is that we now give the floor to Martin, who's going to be talking about Spain, and on the Italian side, there will be a representative, and then we will have a discussion. This is for extending rights and protection to platform workers via extension of collective agreements.
Very well. Now, on this this case study, well, it's based on the sector of hotels and catering industry in Spain, in fact. First of all, let me say that the unions and the employers' associations of the catering sector in Spain know very well how these digital platforms work. The digital platforms that have to do with distributing food, with delivering food, they know just how precarious the working conditions are. They also know full well that these platforms intend to expand their activities. One of the latest developments is that the intention of the digital platforms to set up kitchens in city centers just for the dispatching of their riders more easily and in less time. These so-called kitchens are not going to be kitchens in the traditional sense. They're just there for the distribution of food. And they also know that the activities of these digital platforms mean unfair competition in the catering sector. So therefore, because of the need to defend their industry and the working conditions of the workers in the catering industry faced with the unfair competition from the digital platforms, what they did was that the biggest unions, the majority unions, including the UGT, my union, proposed a very interesting measure regarding collective bargaining. That measure, the measure proposed, was for a collective catering bargaining agreement that would include digital platforms in their scope, digital platforms that are devoted to delivering prepared food and drinks on their own behalf or on behalf of other companies. And that would also include the workers that deliver, that carry out that work, either on foot or with vehicles that don't require any administrative authorization. Now that change to the collective bargaining agreement that was accepted by the employers will have a very important consequence. That is, the provision of services by the food deliverers that work for digital platforms will be covered by the rights and duties established by the collective bargaining agreement for the rest of the workers in that sector. So in other words, if you include these companies and these workers in the collective bargaining agreement, the Uber Eats or Deliveroo riders or Globo or whatever can be considered workers of the catering sector. That new professional category may allow for better pay, better working conditions. They might have certain collective rights, better occupational risk prevention, and better social protection. So finally, wider coverage by the Social Security system and more material benefits, a better social security coverage, in a word. But that will only be possible if and only if the relation between the digital platform workers and the company or the digital platform is not one considered to be a self-employed worker or an economically dependent self-employed worker, which is a hybrid category that we have in Spain. It will only be possible if the contractual link between the platforms and these workers is a purely labor contract, because the collective bargaining in Spain and collective bargaining agreements, the standards covering collective bargaining agreements, the conditions of work, etc., according to Spanish legislation, can only be applicable to workers that are considered to be salaried workers or not, and not self-employed workers, even if they're economically dependent. So, having said that, that measure for the time being in our country is not having any real direct effects when it comes to the actual rights of the workers. No direct effect on the rights of workers, because the majority, if not all of these digital platforms, have self-employed workers or economically dependent self-employed workers. Even so, we think that that measure can be an important step forward toward our fundamental goal, our fundamental struggle as a trade union, that is the defense of the status and the working conditions of platform workers. That measure can provide further arguments before the courts. The courts that are now considering the specific cases regarding the work status of the riders, and obviously can provide them with additional arguments in favor of their being considered to be salaried rather than self-employed workers. It's another argument then, and therefore we consider that there will be a good argument in favor of decent work conditions and sufficient social protection for these workers. So, we are currently working to provide cover to all platform work activities in collective bargaining agreements in those sectors in which there's a rise in the use of the platform economy. For example, highway transport. Amazon Flex in Spain is gaining a lot of ground in that sector. If in the collective bargaining agreement for highway transport, if that agreement includes digital platforms and workers who work for digital platforms, well, that might be another argument in our favor. And that might help those workers who are working for a company and who depend on a company and who have to obey the orders of a company, that company being the digital platform, may be considered to be salaried workers rather than self-employed. That is the category which I think is the one that they should belong to in order to enjoy the best possible protection afforded by our labor laws and by our social security system. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Martine.
Thank you very much, Martine. Let me go right on to Italy, and then there'll be a general discussion.